Before the noise of empire, before the thunder of legions and marble cities, the valley of the Tiber was quiet. It lay between gentle hills covered in oak and fig trees, a world of shepherds, traders, and the occasional traveler who passed by on footpaths worn by centuries of feet. The sun fell softly across the fields, turning the river gold, and at dusk, smoke rose from scattered hearths. It was a modest land, not the kind from which one expects greatness. Yet, as old storytellers whispered, even the humblest river may carry the reflection of the gods. In the nearby town of Alba Longa, a princess named Rhea Silvia had been forced into the service of the goddess Vesta, sworn to keep her sacred flame burning and to remain untouched by man. But fate, or something divine, had other plans. One spring night, as she drew water from the river, the god Mars appeared. In a vision of fire and storm, he made her his. When her twin sons were born, the king, Rhea's uncle Amulius, feared a prophecy that they would one day overthrow him. He ordered the infants drowned. A servant carried the basket to the Tiber, heart heavy. The river was swollen from rain. Its surface glistened like a sheet of bronze. As he lowered the basket into the current, the servant whispered a prayer, not to save himself, but that the gods might spare the innocents. The basket drifted, turning gently, carried downstream until it snagged in the roots of a wild fig tree beneath the Palatine Hill. The river calmed, and in the soft rush of water came a new sound, the low growl of an animal. From the undergrowth stepped a she-wolf, lean and silver-eyed. She sniffed the air, padded forward, and with surprising tenderness began to lick the infants' faces. The wolves of the old forests were feared, symbols of night and hunger. But in this tale, the wild bent to nurture. For days the wolf guarded the twins. She hunted, returned, and let them nurse beneath her belly. Some say a woodpecker, sacred to Mars, brought them food. Others tell that the wolf was merely a woman of the forest wearing a wolf skin, misunderstood by later ages. But the Romans would never doubt the divine. The wolf was destiny itself. Eventually, a shepherd named Faustulus found the children. He brought them home to his wife, Acca Larentia, and together they raised the boys as their own. The twins grew strong, fierce, and loyal to each other. They raced through the woods, wrestled in the dust, and learned the secrets of the land. They were leaders even as children, bold, proud, unafraid of blood or toil. Years later, when they discovered their royal birth, they raised an army of shepherds and outlaws, stormed Alba Longa, and restored their grandfather to the throne. But their bond, so deep in youth, could not survive the hunger for greatness. The brothers chose a site for a new city near the place of their rescue. Yet they quarreled. Romulus favored the Palatine Hill. Remus preferred the Aventine. They sought divine guidance, watching birds, counting omens, but their signs contradicted one another. Words turned sharp, pride turned to rage. When Remus mocked Romulus's low wall and leapt across it, his brother struck him down. Romulus buried Remus on the Aventine, weeping as he laid stones over his brother's grave. "So perish whoever crosses my walls," he said. Thus Rome was founded in sorrow, a city born not only of courage but of blood. Romulus opened the gates wide to all who wished to enter. Exiles, wanderers, thieves, slaves, and in doing so created not a tribe, but a people. Rome's strength would always lie in that mixture, the wolf's ferocity, the shepherd's patience, and the god's ambition. The Tiber continued to whisper through the reeds. The hills waited, knowing that from this act of violence and vision, a world was about to awaken. In the centuries that followed, the Romans would tell of 7 kings, each shaping the infant city like a craftsman molding clay. First was Romulus himself, soldier, lawgiver, and founder. He built the Senate, the assembly of elders, and gave the people structure. To populate the new city, he invited neighboring tribes to join, promising safety and opportunity. But when Rome lacked women, he resorted to a desperate act. During a festival dedicated to Neptune, he invited the Sabinesto celebrate, and at a signal, the Romans seized their daughters. War followed, and for a time it seemed the young city would be destroyed by its own ambition. Yet the Sabine women, now wives and mothers, stood between the armies and pleaded for peace. "Do not make us twice bereft," they cried, "of fathers and of husbands." Their courage joined the two peoples into one. The Sabine king, Titus Tatius, ruled alongside Romulus until his death. Rome, born of conflict, learned that unity sometimes demands forgiveness. After Romulus vanished in a storm, said to have been taken up to heaven as the god Quirinus, the Romans chose Numa Pompilius, a Sabine, to succeed him. Numa was peace where Romulus had been war. He closed the gates of the Temple of Janus, symbol of conflict, and kept them shut for his entire reign. He taught his people to worship the gods with discipline, not fear. Under Numa, the calendar was ordered. The Vestal virgins renewed their vows, and laws of ritual and justice replaced brute strength. But time erodes peace. Tullus Hostilius, the next king, was impatient with Numa's stillness. He revived the army and challenged Alba Longa, claiming that Rome's honor required conquest. To avoid a full war, it was decided that champions would fight on each city's behalf. 3 brothers from each side, the Hieraci for Rome, the Curiati for Alba. The duel was fierce. 2 Hieraci fell, but the last feigned retreat, then struck his pursuers down one by one. Rome triumphed, but victory bred arrogance. Tullus neglected the rights of the gods, and it was said Jupiter struck him with lightning as punishment. Ancus Marcius, Numa's grandson, restored balance. He was pious yet practical, expanding the city's borders and building the first bridge across the Tiber. He founded Ostia, Rome's port, connecting the city to the sea, a gesture that would one day echo across continents. Then came the Etruscan kings, outsiders from the north whose culture was rich in art, engineering, and mystery. Tarquinius Priscus doubled the Senate, drained the marshes, and began the Circus Maximus, where horses raced before roaring crowds. He also initiated vast public works, believing that grandeur inspired loyalty. His reign ended by assassination, but his wife, Tanaquil, wise and shrewd, ensured that his chosen successor, Servius Tullius, took the throne. Servius was once a slave, yet under him, Rome grew both in size and in spirit. He built the Servian Wall encircling the city, and reformed society by dividing citizens according to wealth, not birth. In the field, rich men brought armor and horses, while the poor stood in ranks with sling and spear. Each had a place, each a duty. His vision was one of order, harsh but fair. Then came Tarquinius Superbus, Tarquin the Proud, last of the kings. He seized power by force, ruled by terror, and silenced the Senate. His arrogance knew no measure. When his son Sextus violated Lucretia, a noblewoman renowned for virtue, she took her own life, calling for vengeance. Her father and husband, joined by Lucius Junius Brutus, rose against the Tarquins. The people followed, Tarquin fled, and the Romans swore an oath. Never again would one man rule them. In the year 509 BCE, the monarchy ended. The temple bells tolled. The doors of Janus opened once more, not to welcome war, but to announce a new age. Rome, barely born, had already learned the dangers of power. And in that vow, never again a king, the seed of a republic took root. When the last king fled, Rome stood trembling between pride and fear. The people had torn down the crown, but what would replace it? For the first time in their history, they faced a question no god could answer: how to rule themselves. 2 consuls were chosen, ordinary men, though both from noble lines, to share power for a single year. Their authority, their imperium, would expire with time, a safeguard against tyranny. Beneath them sat the Senate, old men wrapped in white togas, guardians of memory and law. Around them gathered the assemblies, the citizen's voice, a murmur at first, but destined to swell. Yet liberty was not gentle. It came with quarrels, with suspicion, with the lingering scent of monarchy still clinging to the stones. The patricians, proud families descended from the earliest senators, saw themselves as stewards of Rome's destiny. The plebeians, the common folk, were soldiers and craftsmen, the hands that built the city. They had fought the wars, tilled the fields, and paid the taxes, but their names were absent from the tablets of power. Tension smoldered like embers. In the markets, plebeian voices whispered of debt and hunger. In the Senate, patrician lips murmured of disorder. When the poor found themselves sold into slavery for unpaid loans, they abandoned the city altogether, marching to the sacred mount and refusing to return until they were heard. For the first time, Rome's rulers learned that power could not stand without consent. From this protest came the office of the tribune of the people, men chosen from among the plebeians to protect their rights. Their bodies were declared sacred. Any who harmed them was cursed. They could veto decrees, shield citizens from injustice, and remind the proud that even the lowborn carried divine favor. It was a fragile victory, but it became the heartbeat of Roman politics, the belief that law, not lineage, should decide a man's fate. Over time, Rome codified its first written laws, the 12 tables, etched in bronze and displayed in the Forum for all to see. They were rough, unpolished, sometimes cruel, yet they offered what the people demanded: transparency. No longer would judgment be whispered in the dark. A child could stand before the tablets and know the bounds of his world. The new republic learned by trial. Some years saw good harvests and peace, others famine and invasion. Yet through every crisis, Rome endured. It had no king, but it had something far stronger, an idea that a citizen's worth was not in obedience, but in service. That authority must be shared, that the fate of the city was the business of all. As generations passed, patrician and plebeian bled together on the battlefield. War became the great equalizer, the crucible of citizenship. Each soldier returned home with pride and with questions. If they could fight together, why not rule together? Slowly, stubbornly, the Republic answered. The Republic grew in the shadow of enemies. To the north lay the Etruscans, masters of the hills and builders of cities older than Rome. To the south, the Latins and Samnites, fierce mountain peoples who prized freedom as dearly as the Romans themselves. War was not a choice, it was the air they breathed. In the early 5th century BCE, an Etruscan army under Lars Porsena besieged Rome, seeking to restore the Tarquin kings. On the bridge of the Tiber stood a single soldier, Horatius Cocles, defending the crossing while his comrades destroyed it behind him. Arrows rained down, the river roared below. When the bridge collapsed, Horatius prayed to Father Tiber, plunged into the torrent, and swam to safety under a storm of spears. His courage became legend, proof that one man's resolve could embody an entire people. Such stories multiplied, binding Romans to their ideals. When the patricians tried to hoard grain during famine, the plebeians threatened revolt until the Senate appointed a farmer named Cincinnatus as dictator, a temporary monarch for times of crisis. He left his plough, led Rome to victory, and returned home the same day, declining honors and power. His humility became Rome's mirror, a warning that greatness meant self-restraint. Still, not all crises ended nobly. In 390 BCE, a horde of Gauls descended from the north and crushed the Roman army at the river Allia. They entered the city and set it aflame. The capital alone held out, its defenders awakened at night by the cackling of sacred geese as the enemy crept up the slope. When dawn broke, the Romans drove the Gauls back, but the cost was ruin. The city smoldered, temples shattered, walls blackened, Rome rebuilt. Stone by stone, house by house, they raised their city again, larger, stronger, prouder. Defeat had burned fear out of them. From that moment, Romans began to believe they were chosen to endure anything the world could throw at them. In the century that followed, the Republic turned outward. The Latin League, once Rome's allies, became its rivals. The wars were bitter but short. Diplomacy followed conquest. Rome learned to integrate rather than destroy, granting partial citizenship and shared rights. In this inclusiveness lay its genius. Conquered peoples did not vanish. They became Roman. The next challenge came from the rugged highlands of Samnium. The Samnite Wars tested every ounce of Roman endurance. In one grim episode, at the Caudine Forks, an entire Roman army was trapped in a mountain pass. The Samnite commander forced the legions to pass beneath a yoke of spears, a symbol of humiliation. Rome's pride bled that day, yet its spirit hardened. They rebuilt their legions, reorganized their command, and returned to the field. By the war's end, the Samnites were broken, but Rome had learned the art of patience, victory not by brilliance but by persistence. Through alliance and annexation, Italy came under Rome's sway. Each conquered town became a link in a chain of loyalty. Roman roads, straight as the will of their builders, stitched the peninsula together. The most famous, the Appian Way, began as a military route and became a highway of culture, carrying goods, soldiers, and ideas. Along it marched the discipline that defined the Roman way of life. With Italy secure, Rome looked beyond the sea. Merchants brought word of a distant power across the waves. Carthage, rich, cunning, and old. Its ships ruled the western Mediterranean. Its harbors gleamed with trade from Africa and Spain. Carthage and Rome eyed one another across the water, each knowing that sooner or later the world was too small for both. Yet before those storms, Rome rested a moment in its newfound power. The forum filled with chatter, temples rose, the Senate debated questions of grain, roads, and colonies. The Republic was still rough, still human, but its foundations had been laid. A city rebuilt from ashes, bound by law, faith, and the stubborn refusal to bow. From shepherds and exiles, it had become a people. From a people, a nation, and from a nation, soon, an empire. By the 3rd century BCE, Rome stood unchallenged across the Italian peninsula. Yet beyond the sea, another power ruled, older, richer, and steeped in trade. Carthage, daughter of Tyre, mistress of the western Mediterranean. Its harbors were forests of masts. Its merchants spoke every tongue of the known world. Rome and Carthage had once been allies. Now they regarded each other like wary beasts sharing one watering hole. When conflict came, it began not with kings, but with mercenaries and frightened Sicilian cities. A small spark on the island of Sicily lit the First Punic War. Rome, a land power, had no navy. Carthage, born of sailors, had thousands of ships. Yet necessity breeds miracles. Rome captured a wrecked Punic vessel, studied its design, and built a fleet of her own. The carpenters worked day and night, forests falling to feed the shipyards. When the fleets met, Rome added a new invention, the corvus, a boarding bridge with an iron spike. Battles at sea became battles on land. The legions, fighting from ship to ship, turned the sea red with victory. After 23 years of brutal endurance, Carthage sued for peace. Rome took Sicily, her first province beyond Italy, and tasted the intoxication of empire. But Carthage endured. In the silence after defeat, a new commander rose, Hamilcar Barca, followed by his brilliant son Hannibal. The Barcids built a new dominion in Spain, rich with silver and soldiers. Hannibal, still a boy, was said to have sworn before the altar of his father that he would never be a friend to Rome. In 218 BCE, he kept his oath. With a vast army and a handful of elephants, Hannibal crossed the Alps in winter, a feat so daring it seemed madness. He lost half his men to cold and rock slides, yet when he descended into Italy, the Romans found him waiting. At Trebia, Trasimene, and Cannae, he annihilated Roman armies. At Cannae, 70,000 men fell in a single day. The survivors whispered that Rome was finished, yet the city refused to die. The Senate forbade mourning, raised new legions, and filled the ranks with freedmen and boys. Women donated their gold for the treasury. Old men drilled in the streets. Rome had been humbled, but not broken. While Hannibal prowled the countryside, unable to take the walls of the capital, Rome adapted. A young general named Publius Cornelius Scipio, later called Africanus, struck at Hannibal's base in Spain, cutting his supply lines. Then he carried the war into Africa itself. In 202 BCE, at the Battle of Zama, Scipio faced Hannibal in the open desert. Elephants charged, dust rose, and the Roman lines held. When the battle ended, Carthage was broken, its empire gone, its navy surrendered. Still, some senators whispered, Carthago delenda est. Carthage must be destroyed. They could not bear that the old rival lived at all. Half a century later, they acted. The Third Punic War was short and merciless. The Romans surrounded the city, starved it, burned it. For 17 days the streets ran with smoke and screams. When it was over, they plowed salt into the ground so nothing would grow. In the same year, 146 BCE, Roman legions razed Corinth in Greece. Two worlds fell in one season, the merchant of Africa and the philosopher of Hellas. The Mediterranean had a new master. Rome called it Mare Nostrum, our sea. But victory carries its own poison. Wealth and slaves flooded the city. Estates grew vast while small farms vanished. In the markets, Greek tutors taught aristocrats' children, while Italian peasants begged for bread. The Republic was richer than ever, and more divided. The centuries after Carthage's fall glittered with triumph, yet beneath the marble the foundations cracked. The Roman ideal of the sturdy farmer citizen, loyal, humble, self-sufficient, began to fade. Veterans returned from distant wars to find their fields taken, their families gone. The land now belonged to the latifundia, vast estates worked by chained men captured abroad. Out of this misery rose two brothers, Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus, sons of Cornelia, a matron whom poets would later call the mother of the Gracchi. Tiberius the elder served with distinction in Spain, where he saw Roman soldiers starving while landlords feasted. As tribune in 133 BCE, he proposed a simple, radical law to enforce an old limit on public land and give the surplus back to the poor. The Senate resisted. They called him reckless, ambitious, dangerous. Tiberius appealed to the people directly, bypassing the patrician order. On voting day, violence erupted. In the chaos of clubs and stones, Tiberius was struck down near the temple of Jupiter, his body flung into the Tiber, the same river that had once carried Romulus. Rome had tasted the blood of her own sons. A decade later, Gaius, gentler but no less determined, took up the cause. He built roads, founded colonies, and established a grain law to feed the hungry at a fixed price. He even sought to extend citizenship to Rome's Italian allies, those who fought beside her yet remained second class. But compromise was foreign to the Senate. Mobs clashed again, and Gaius fell on his sword as his supporters were cut down. The brothers were dead, yet their ghosts haunted the Republic. The struggle between rich and poor, between Senate and people, had become permanent. Soon new men rose, soldiers who owed loyalty not to the state, but to their generals. One was Gaius Marius, a rough, disciplined commander from humble birth. Facing threats from Numidian kings and northern tribes, he reformed the army. Landless citizens could now enlist. The state armed and paid them. The legions became professional, loyal to their leader's promise of land and glory. Marius triumphed, saving Rome from the barbarian hordes, but his success bred envy. Another ambitious general, Lucius Cornelius Sulla, claimed command of a lucrative eastern campaign. When the Senate reassigned it to Marius, Sulla marched his army on Rome itself, the first Roman to turn his legions against the city. Streets ran with blood. The unthinkable had become real. Civil war followed. Marius seized power, died soon after. Sulla returned, triumphant and pitiless. He drew up lists of enemies, proscriptions, men condemned to death, their estates confiscated. The heads of senators decorated the forum gates. Yet Sulla, believing himself a restorer of order, eventually laid down his dictatorship and retired to his villa. The Republic, scarred but breathing, staggered onward. In the silence after his death, something in Rome had changed. Men had seen legions settle political quarrels. They had seen law bend before the sword. Power was no longer a duty. It was a prize. As the old century ended, Rome stretched from Spain to Asia, her banners fluttering over 3 continents. Yet in her streets, the poor grew restless, the wealthy fearful, and the Senate deaf. The world's greatest republic had become a house of rival factions, all calling themselves patriots, all convinced the gods favored them. And far away, in a modest house on the Subura's crowded slope, a child named Gaius Julius Caesar was born. Rome had conquered the world, but lost her soul. Her streets gleamed with marble temples and the spoils of kings, yet hunger still gnawed at the poor. Senators feasted under painted ceilings, while veterans slept under bridges. The Republic was vast, proud, and crumbling from within. In this restless world, one man's name began to stir whispers: Gaius Julius Caesar. Born into an ancient but modest patrician family, Caesar grew up in a time of violence and ambition. As a young man, he was handsome, eloquent, and daring to the point of recklessness. Pirates once captured him and demanded a ransom of 20 talents. Caesar laughed, saying he was worth 50. When freed, he hunted them down and crucified them, with mercy enough to cut their throats first. He charmed the crowds with generosity, dazzling them with games, feasts, and bold words in the Senate. To the old guard, it was dangerous. To the people, he was a hero. He rose through the ranks, quaestor, praetor, consul, each office a step toward destiny. But Caesar knew that power required more than words. It required soldiers. So, in a political alliance known as the First Triumvirate, he joined forces with Pompey the Great, the Republic's finest general, and Marcus Licinius Crassus, its richest man. The three men divided Rome's world like hunters dividing spoils. Caesar took command in Gaul, a wild land of forests and tribes stretching beyond the Alps. There, he forged his legend. For 8 years he campaigned through mud and snow, crossing rivers no Roman had dared, building bridges where none could stand, and defeating armies 10 times his size. His victories filled the forum with trophies and the treasury with gold. His writings, calm, measured, deceptively simple, told the story of conquest as if it were nature itself unfolding. But back in Rome, the alliance frayed. Crassus died in a disastrous campaign against the Parthians. Pompey grew jealous of Caesar's fame and allied himself with the Senate. They demanded that Caesar disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen, vulnerable to his enemies. Standing at the edge of Italy, beside a shallow stream called the Rubicon, Caesar faced the choice that would change history. To cross meant civil war. To turn back meant ruin. The legend says he hesitated only a moment, then said, "Alea iacta est," the die is cast. He crossed. Legions followed their general, not the Senate. City after city opened its gates. Pompey fled to Greece, where Caesar pursued him. At Pharsalus, their armies clashed in dust and thunder. Pompey's veterans fell before Caesar's genius. When Pompey fled to Egypt, he was murdered by a frightened king seeking favor. When Caesar arrived and saw his rival's severed head, he wept. He stayed in Egypt long enough to meet Cleopatra, the young queen who ruled through wit and beauty. Their alliance, political, passionate, legendary, would entwine their names forever. Caesar returned to Rome, not as consul, but as dictator, a title meant for times of crisis. He used it to rebuild the Republic's shattered heart. He forgave enemies, reformed the calendar, granted citizenship to foreigners, and planned great works across the empire. But his mercy frightened the proud. When statues rose in his honor and crowds hailed him king, old senators whispered of tyranny. On the Ides of March, 44 BCE, Caesar entered the Senate unguarded. His friends surrounded him, among them Brutus and Cassius, men he trusted. Daggers flashed. 23 wounds bloomed across his robe. As he fell, he drew his toga over his face. They thought they had saved the Republic. Instead, they killed its last hope of peace. Caesar's death plunged Rome into darkness. The Senate trembled. Mobs filled the streets. At his funeral, Mark Antony, his loyal lieutenant, held aloft the blood-stained cloak and read Caesar's will, which left his wealth to the people and adopted his young grand-nephew, Gaius Octavius, as his son and heir. The crowd, weeping and furious, turned on the assassins. The Republic's saviors became fugitives. Antony and Octavian, soon to be Augustus, formed a fragile alliance with Lepidus, creating the Second Triumvirate. Together they hunted Caesar's killers, defeating Brutus and Cassius at the Battle of Philippi. Yet the victors soon became rivals. Antony, drawn to the east, joined Cleopatra in Egypt. Together they dreamed of an empire of their own, Greek in grace, Egyptian in wealth. In Rome, Octavian painted him as a traitor bewitched by a foreign queen. Propaganda flooded the streets. Antony's soldiers wore Eastern robes. Cleopatra's image appeared beside Roman coins. The Senate, terrified of a divided world, declared war, not on Antony, but on Cleopatra herself. In 31 BCE, at the Battle of Actium, Octavian's fleet met theirs on the open sea. The wind shifted. Cleopatra's ships fled. Antony followed. Their cause was lost. A year later, trapped in Alexandria, they took their own lives, Antony by sword, Cleopatra by the bite of a serpent. Octavian returned to Rome alone, the last man standing in a century of chaos. The Senate, exhausted, granted him new powers, new titles. He refused the name of king, for Rome hated kings, and called himself princeps, the first among equals. Yet all power flowed through him. In 27 BCE, he became Augustus, ushering in what poets would call the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. It was not peace as the world had known it before, but order imposed by the legions. Borders stabilized, roads stretched from the Atlantic to the Euphrates, and trade flowed like blood through the empire's veins. Augustus rebuilt the city, marble where brick had been, temples where ruins stood. He honored the old gods and revived ancient festivals. He spoke of morality, family, duty, and restraint, even as he quietly exiled his own daughter for her scandals. He reformed the army into a standing force with pensions and loyalty oaths to him alone. Veterans settled across the provinces, spreading Roman law and Latin speech. Governors ruled by his will. The Senate still met, but its debates no longer decided destiny. Yet Augustus was no tyrant of iron. His genius lay in subtlety, in letting others believe they were free. The people adored him. Poets like Virgil and Horace sang of Rome's divine mission, to rule, to civilize, to bring peace through strength. You, Roman, remember to rule the nations with your power. Virgil wrote, to crown peace with law and spare the conquered. As Augustus aged, he prepared carefully for succession, ensuring that no chaos would follow. When he died in 14 CE, the Senate declared him divine. The boy who had avenged Caesar and rebuilt the Republic was now a god. Under his long shadow, Rome entered its golden age of aqueducts, libraries, marble forums, and roads that stitched the world together. But beneath the calm surface, the old tension remained. For every Augustus, there would be a Nero. For every poet, a tyrant. The Republic was gone forever, yet its dream that citizens might govern themselves never died. It lingered in every speech, every scroll, every whisper that dared to question the throne. And so began the empire, vast, glittering, and fragile. After Augustus's death, the empire passed to his stepson Tiberius, a man of talent shadowed by gloom. He had spent years commanding legions in the north, earning victories without fanfare. As emperor, he ruled with restraint, keeping the peace Augustus had built, yet he trusted few and smiled rarely. He withdrew more and more from Rome's marble heart, governing from the cliffs of Capri, where rumor said the sea winds carried cries from his hidden courts. Whether truth or slander, Tiberius became a ghost on the throne, an emperor whose power was everywhere, but whose face was seen by none. When he died, the empire held its breath and exhaled madness. Caligula, the young heir and son of the beloved Germanicus, began as a figure of promise. The crowds wept when he took the purple. He was charming, generous, and playful. But months later, an illness twisted his mind. The boy who had once addressed the soldiers as brothers began to see himself as a god. He built golden bridges between palaces and temples so he could walk as Jupiter among men. He ordered statues of himself placed beside those of the gods and whispered that the moon visited his bed. When senators hesitated to worship him, he mocked them, and when soldiers laughed, he punished them. He even named his horse Consul, a joke perhaps, or a warning. The madness could not last. One morning in the palace tunnel, the Praetorian Guard struck him down. The people cheered, the empire trembled, and in the confusion, the guards discovered a trembling old man hiding behind a curtain. Claudius, uncle of Caligula, scholar, stammerer, long mocked as a fool. They hailed him emperor on the spot. Claudius surprised them all. He was cautious but capable, more comfortable with scrolls than swords. He reformed the bureaucracy, expanded citizenship, and undertook a campaign in Britain, adding the island to Rome's dominion. He freed slaves, built aqueducts, and wrote histories no one dared read aloud while he lived. Yet his private life was ruled by stronger wills, his wives and freedmen, each scheming for power. His last wife, Agrippina the Younger, persuaded him to adopt her son, Nero. Soon after, Claudius died. Poison, many whispered, slipped into a dish of mushrooms. Nero was 16 when he became emperor, and for a time Rome rejoiced. He loved poetry, music, and the theater. Under the guidance of his mother and the philosopher Seneca, he promised a gentler age. But indulgence grew like ivy. He tired of Seneca's wisdom, banished his mother, and later ordered her death. He raced chariots in disguise, sang on stage while courtiers pretended delight, and called himself the artist of the world. Then came the Great Fire of 64 CE. For 9 nights Rome burned. Entire districts vanished, temples melted, families fled into the countryside with nothing but ash in their hair. Nero's enemies claimed he played the lyre as the city burned. His supporters said he opened the gardens to the homeless. What matters is that, when the embers cooled, he seized the empty land and built a palace so vast it contained artificial lakes, vineyards, and a colossal statue of himself. He blamed the disaster on a small, obscure sect, the Christians, and unleashed persecutions whose cruelty shocked even the hardened Romans. The spell broke. Governors rebelled, generals turned their legions west. In 68 CE, facing certain defeat, Nero took his own life, murmuring, "What an artist dies in me." With him ended the Julio-Claudian line, and the empire was left without heir or anchor. Nero's death unchained chaos. The legions, long loyal to their commanders more than to the Senate, proclaimed emperors of their own choosing. Within a single year, 4 men wore the purple. First came Galba, an aging governor summoned by rebellion. He entered Rome stern and unyielding, slashing privileges, cutting pay, calling himself servant of the Republic. But the soldiers wanted gold, not virtue. When he refused, they killed him in the Forum, his blood pooling beside the same stones where Caesar had fallen. Otho, once Nero's companion, seized power next. He sought reconciliation, pardoned enemies, and promised peace. Yet another army in Germany raised its own emperor, Vitellius. Their forces met at Bedriacum. Otho's troops broke, and he, rather than prolong the killing, fell upon his sword. His last words were said to be, "May others die less uselessly." Vitellius reigned only months. He feasted while provinces burned, draping himself in perfumes and purple. Then from the east came legions loyal to a soldier of humble birth, Vespasian. He had commanded in Judea, building his fame on patience, not spectacle. His army marched west, and by the end of 69 CE, Vitellius was dragged from his palace and struck down. When the dust settled, Vespasian stood alone. Rome exhaled. A commoner had become emperor, and the empire, weary of madness, found stability in simplicity. Vespasian rebuilt finances drained by years of chaos. He taxed luxuries, revived trade, and began new construction on the site of Nero's vanished palace, the Colosseum, a gift to the people. "Money has no smell," he said when mocked for taxing the public latrines. Practical, wry, and unpretentious, he governed as though the empire were a family farm needing repair. His son Titus succeeded him, a soldier adored by the legions and the city alike. He completed the Colosseum and opened it with 100 days of games. Gladiators, beasts, and pageantry meant to wash away the memory of civil war. But fate offered him little time. In 79 CE, Mount Vesuvius erupted, burying Pompeii and Herculaneum beneath fire and ash. Titus sent aid, comforted refugees, and wept as he watched the sky darken with smoke. 2 years later, a plague swept the empire. Then, as the city recovered, Titus himself died suddenly. The people mourned as if a god had fallen. His brother Domitian took the throne next, a man of intelligence and insecurity. He fortified the frontiers, restored discipline, and demanded to be addressed as Dominus et Deus, Lord and God. He ruled efficiently but brooked no dissent. Spies multiplied, senators vanished, fear crept through marble corridors. For 15 years he held the empire tight in his fist until conspirators within his court struck him down. With his death, the Flavian dynasty ended, yet his reign left Rome stronger, richer, more organized than it had been since Augustus. The empire had survived tyranny, fire, and plague, and still the legions marched, still the aqueducts sang. By the century's end, the Mediterranean world was a Roman lake, its peoples bound by law, trade, and a common dream of order. The Republic was long gone, but in the hush after so much turmoil, Rome once again felt eternal. After the storm of the Flavians came an era of light, what later generations would call the Golden Age of the Empire. The year was 96 CE, and on a quiet night, after 15 years of iron rule, the tyrant Domitian fell beneath the daggers of his own servants. The Senate, trembling but free, sought not another despot, but a man of balance, Nerva, old, wise, and childless. For once, Rome chose humility. Nerva governed briefly, restoring confiscated lands, recalling exiles, and calming fears. But the empire was vast, the legions restless. In distant camps, soldiers muttered that emperors made by senators were weak. To secure peace, Nerva adopted as his son and heir the general Marcus Ulpius Trajan, commander of the Rhine legions. It was a brilliant choice, the beginning of a century of steady hands. Trajan ruled with vigor and justice. He was soldier and builder, conqueror and administrator. His campaigns in Dacia, modern Romania, brought back mountains of gold and thousands of new citizens. From those spoils rose Trajan's Forum and Trajan's Column, carved with spiraling reliefs of his victories. The empire reached its greatest expanse, from the sands of Arabia to the moors of Scotland, from the Atlantic to the Persian Gulf. 50 million souls lived under Roman peace. But Trajan's heart was restless. He dreamed of Alexander and the East. When he marched against Parthia, the old Persian rival, he won glittering victories and took the title Optimus Princeps, the best of emperors. Yet on the journey home, sick and weary, he died before seeing Rome again. His ashes were placed in a golden urn within his own column, still standing, still watching over the city he adorned. His adopted son Hadrian succeeded him, a man of art and reason. Where Trajan expanded, Hadrian fortified. He saw that empire had limits, that walls, not borders of dust, preserved civilization. Across the northern frontier, he built the great Hadrian's Wall, stretching from sea to sea in Britain, a stone serpent marking the edge of Rome's reach. He traveled endlessly to Egypt, Greece, Syria, and the provinces of the West, inspecting troops, restoring temples, sketching designs. He loved beauty as much as power, and his villa at Tivoli became a garden of the world's wonders. Greek colonnades, Egyptian statues, whispering fountains. But Hadrian's reign also carried sorrow. His beloved companion Antinous drowned mysteriously in the Nile. Grief turned Hadrian inward. He deified the boy, founded cities in his name, and withdrew into melancholy contemplation. When he died in 138 CE, he left behind an empire at peace and an adopted heir, Antoninus Pius. If Hadrian had been the architect, Antoninus was the caretaker. For 23 years he ruled without war, governing through letters and law rather than conquest. He reformed taxation, protected slaves from cruelty, and extended citizenship to freedmen's children. The world called him pious, dutiful for his devotion to family and gods. His reign was so tranquil that later ages scarcely believed it real. When Antoninus died, his adopted son Marcus Aurelius ascended. Philosopher, soldier, emperor. He studied Stoicism, wrote meditations on virtue and fate, and sought to rule not as master, but as servant of reason. Yet even wisdom cannot halt fate. From the northern forests came tribes, Marcomanni, Quadi, Sarmatians, pressing against the Danube frontier. Marcus led his legions himself, writing by lamplight in a soldier's tent, reflecting on mortality and duty. At the same time, a terrible sickness swept the empire, the Antonine Plague, killing millions. Rome, once invincible, seemed mortal at last. Still, Marcus persevered. When he died in 180 CE, he left behind a book, his Meditations, and a son, Commodus. And with Commodus began the unraveling. Commodus had grown in palaces, not in camps. He saw the purple robe not as a burden, but as a costume. Where his father's crown had been a wreath of thorns, his was of gold and laurel. He fancied himself Hercules reborn, striding into the arena dressed in lion skin, wielding a club against trembling gladiators who dared not win. The people cheered. The Senate shuddered. He renamed Rome Colonia Commodiana, the colony of Commodus, and the months of the year after himself. He filled the city with statues bearing his face. While the treasury drained, the frontiers frayed, and plague returned, the emperor amused himself with games and vanity. Assassins were everywhere. Plots multiplied. In 192 CE, his mistress and the Praetorian prefect conspired to end it. A wrestler named Narcissus strangled him in his bath. The following year brought the year of the 5 emperors. Civil war once again stalked the empire's heart. Senators, generals, and soldiers proclaimed rival masters: Pertinax, Didius Julianus, Pescennius Niger, Clodius Albinus, and Septimius Severus. Of them, only Severus endured. A North African by birth, tall, learned, and ruthless, he restored order with iron and gold. He enriched the army, expanded its privileges, and raised new legions loyal to his dynasty. Severus ruled as soldier and scholar, but he knew that the empire's peace was now purchased by the sword. His dying words to his sons were bitter counsel: "Be harmonious, enrich the soldiers, and scorn all others." They obeyed only the last. His sons, Caracalla and Geta, soon turned on each other. Caracalla murdered his brother in their mother's arms and bathed the palace floors with his blood. He then granted Roman citizenship to all free men of the empire, not from generosity, but to increase taxes. He marched north to fight the Germans and east to invade Persia, where his ambition ended with a dagger in his back. From his death to the rise of Diocletian a century later, Rome entered the shadows. The empire did not fall, not yet, but it trembled. New emperors came and went, many lasting only months. Frontiers burned, the treasury emptied, plague and inflation stalked the land. Still, the idea of Rome endured. Her roads still carried messengers and merchants. Her laws still ordered life in every province. From Africa to Gaul, from Egypt to Britain, millions still called themselves Romans, even as the light grew dimmer. The Golden Age faded not with a bang, but with exhaustion. The empire had grown too vast, too heavy to carry its own weight. Armies were spread thin along frontiers that stretched from the misty highlands of Britain to the burning sands of Syria. Trade faltered, and the silver coins that once bore emperors' proud profiles turned pale with copper. Whispers spread through the provinces that the gods were angry, that Rome had forgotten her old virtues, that the empire's heart was rotting. In 235 CE, the Emperor Alexander Severus tried to buy peace from the Germans instead of fighting. His soldiers, hungry, proud, insulted, murdered him in his tent. With his death, the empire lost not just a ruler, but the illusion of stability. For the next 50 years, Rome would devour itself. Legions crowned their generals emperor one week and killed them the next. At times, there were 5 emperors, at others, none. Cities were sacked, provinces rebelled, and whole armies vanished into civil wars that no one even remembered the reasons for. The empire split into pieces. The Gallic Empire in the west, ruled from Gaul and Britain, and the Palmyrene Empire in the east, where the desert queen Zenobia reigned in splendor. She ruled Syria, Egypt, and Arabia, draped in pearls and armor, calling herself Augusta, Empress. Meanwhile, from beyond the Rhine and Danube came waves of tribes, Goths, Vandals, Alemanni, seeking land and plunder. From the east came a new power, the Sassanid Persians, heirs to the glory of Cyrus and Darius. They stormed across Mesopotamia and captured the Emperor Valerian alive, a humiliation Rome had never known. They paraded him in chains before their king and used his back as a human footstool when mounting a horse. When Valerian died in captivity, his skin, some said, was tanned and hung in a Persian temple. Famine followed war, plague followed famine. In cities once proud, grass grew between paving stones. Temples closed, aqueducts broke, and statues of emperors lay headless in the dust. For the first time in centuries, the dream of Rome itself seemed ready to crumble. Yet out of ruin rose men of iron. One of them was Aurelian. Born of peasant stock, raised in the army, he fought like Mars incarnate. In 5 years he reconquered the lost empires, defeated Zenobia, crushed revolts, and restored the borders. He surrounded the Eternal City with mighty walls, the Aurelian walls, that still stand centuries later. When he was done, they called him Restitutor Orbis, restorer of the world. But even Aurelian could not restore eternity. He was assassinated by his own officers, victims of rumor and fear. By the late 3rd century, the empire was exhausted, but alive. And from its battered shell would emerge something new, more rigid and enduring, shaped by the will of one man, Diocletian. When Diocletian seized power in 284 CE, he found an empire bleeding from 100 wounds. He was a soldier from Illyria, hard and deliberate, with eyes like flint. He knew that Rome could no longer be ruled as it had been, by a single man in a single city commanding a world of 50 million souls. So he changed everything. He divided power, creating the Tetrarchy, rule of 4, 2 senior emperors called Augusti, and 2 juniors, Caesaras, each governing a region, each responsible for defense and justice. In theory, they were partners. In truth, they were rivals kept in balance by Diocletian's genius. He abandoned the ancient fiction of the emperor as first citizen. Now, emperors were distant, radiant, surrounded by ceremony and guarded by divine imagery. Subjects knelt before them, and their purple robes shimmered like lightning in marble halls. To restore order, Diocletian reformed the army and the economy. He fixed prices by edict, though merchants found ways around it, and bound peasants to their land to ensure steady taxes. He expanded bureaucracy, appointed loyal administrators, and stamped out rebellion with ruthless precision. Even his faith was rule and discipline. He saw the old gods as pillars of unity, and when Christianity's quiet defiance grew too visible, he unleashed the last and fiercest persecution. Churches were torn down, scriptures burned, thousands killed, yet faith, like Rome herself, endured. After 20 years of iron labor, Diocletian did something no emperor had done before. He retired. He returned to his palace in Dalmatia, a vast seaside fortress of marble and light. When envoys begged him to return, he is said to have smiled and gestured to his gardens. "If you could see the cabbages I have grown," he told them, "you would not ask me to rule again." Rome had found stability, but not peace. Within a decade, the Tetrarchy shattered in civil war. From the chaos emerged one man, Constantine, son of a tetrarch, raised on battlefields. He fought his rivals across Europe until only one, Maxentius, remained, ruling from Rome itself. On the eve of battle, near the Milvian Bridge, Constantine looked up at the sky. According to legend, he saw a cross of light above the sun, and the words, in hoc signo vinces. In this sign, conquer. That night he ordered his men to paint the Christian symbol, the Chi Rho, on their shields. The next day his army triumphed. Maxentius drowned in the Tiber. Constantine entered Rome not as destroyer, but as chosen victor. The world shifted. In 313 CE, he issued the Edict of Milan, granting freedom of worship to all religions and ending centuries of Christian persecution. The faith that had once met in catacombs now built basilicas in the open air. Constantine endowed churches, summoned bishops, and turned to the new religion as a source of unity. He did not outlaw the old gods. Their temples still stood, but the center of gravity had moved. He also changed geography itself. In the east, on the shores of the Bosporus, he founded a new capital, Constantinople, a city of domes and marble, of harbors filled with ships from every sea. Rome, old and venerable, remained the heart of memory. Constantinople became the brain of empire. When Constantine died in 337 CE, baptized on his deathbed, the empire was forever transformed. The eagle still flew, the legions still marched, but their banners now bore crosses. The gods of old faded into myth, and the Christian world began to dawn. In the quiet of his tomb, Constantine rested, half soldier, half saint, half myth. He had forged not only a new Rome, but a new idea. That empire and faith could walk together, for good or for ruin. After Constantine, the empire stood like an ancient oak, its trunk still mighty, but hollowed by time. His sons divided rule among themselves, and for decades the empire flickered between unity and division. The eastern half, with its marble palaces and deep coffers, grew stronger. The western half, stretched across Gaul, Spain, and Italy, weakened with each generation. Christianity spread through every town and valley. Temples of Jupiter and Mars grew quiet. Their columns cracked, their altars cold. The new faith offered comfort to the poor, hope to slaves, and purpose to emperors. But it also changed the spirit of Rome. Duty to the state gave way to duty to God. Bishops replaced senators as voices of moral authority. Old rituals faded. A cross now crowned the standards once gilded with eagles. Then came Theodosius I, last ruler of a united empire. He declared Nicene Christianity the state religion, outlawed pagan rites, and closed the temples that had stood for centuries. In his reign, the old gods were not defeated. They were forgotten. When Theodosius died in 395 CE, he left his two sons heirs to two worlds, Honorius in the west, Arcadius in the east. Never again would a single emperor rule from Britain to Babylon. In the north, beyond the Rhine and Danube, new nations stirred. The Goths, pressed by the mysterious horsemen called Huns, begged refuge within the empire's borders. The Romans agreed, but treated them cruelly, starving and extorting them until rebellion blazed. At Adrianople in 378 CE, Gothic cavalry shattered the Roman army and slew the Emperor Valens. It was a disaster so great that Rome never fully recovered. The legions were no longer invincible. The Goths roamed the Balkans for decades, sometimes foes, sometimes allies. In 410 CE, their king Alaric marched on Rome itself. For the first time in 800 years, barbarian banners fluttered over her walls. The city was sacked, not destroyed, but humbled. Saint Jerome, writing in far-off Bethlehem, cried, "The light of the world is extinguished." Yet even then, life went on. Senators rebuilt, merchants traded, and Rome endured, less a capital, more a memory made stone. Across the provinces, the Western Empire frayed. Britain was abandoned to its own defense. Gaul split into fragments. Spain became a battleground of Vandals and Suebi. In North Africa, the Vandals founded a kingdom and seized Carthage, once Rome's proudest province. From there they ruled the sea, their sails haunting the horizon like ghosts of old enemies returned. The Eastern Empire, ruled from Constantinople, watched and survived. Its walls were strong, its gold deep, its emperors cunning. Greek replaced Latin in speech, but its people still called themselves Romaioi, Romans. While the East endured for another 1,000 years, the West drifted towards silence. And yet, amid decay, the idea of Rome remained a religion of its own. Men still looked to the emperor, whoever he was, as guardian of order. The word Romanus, Roman, still meant civilization itself. By the middle of the 5th century, the empire was a shadow of its former self. Its armies were a patchwork of mercenaries, Goths, Franks, Vandals, fighting for pay or plunder. The emperors of the West lived behind palace walls in Ravenna, safe in marshes and fog, issuing decrees few obeyed. In 451 CE, a new terror came from the steppes. Attila the Hun, called the Scourge of God. His horsemen burned cities and demanded tribute. Only once did the West unite to resist, Romans and Goths side by side under the general Aetius. At the Battle of the Catalaunian Plains, they halted Attila's advance. Aetius was hailed as savior, but gratitude is fragile. The next year, the Emperor Valentinian III killed him out of jealousy, and soon after was himself murdered. The empire staggered on without its last great general. In 455 CE, the Vandals returned, sailing from Africa to sack Rome again. They stripped the city of bronze and silver, but spared the people, hence our word vandalism, destruction without cruelty. Rome could still be looted, but never loved as it once was. Meanwhile, the provinces fell one by one. The Visigoths ruled Spain and southern Gaul, the Franks rose in the north, the Vandals held Africa, and in Britain, new kingdoms of Saxons and Celts grew from abandoned forts. The Western Emperor commanded little beyond Italy, and even there his throne depended on the favor of barbarian generals. One of those generals was Orestes, a Roman of Pannonian birth. In 475 CE, he placed his teenage son on the throne, a boy named Romulus Augustulus. The name itself was poetry and omen. Romulus, founder of Rome, and Augustus, founder of empire. But the cycle had come full circle. The child ruled only in name. A year later, his father refused land payments to his barbarian troops. Their leader, Odoacer, rose in revolt, killed Orestes, and marched on Ravenna. On a quiet September morning in 476 CE, he entered the palace and stripped the boy of his purple cloak. No trumpets sounded, no temples fell. Odoacer sent the imperial insignia to the Eastern Emperor Zeno and declared himself king of Italy. He claimed to govern in the emperor's name, though there was no emperor left in the West. Thus ended the Western Roman Empire, not in flames, but in resignation. Yet even in that twilight, the dream lived on. The bishops of Rome, later called popes, became spiritual heirs to the Caesars. Latin survived in law, in prayer, in the speech of peasants who would one day call themselves Italians, French, Spaniards. The roads still stretched across mountains and plains, the aqueducts still carried water, and the ruins still whispered, Roma invicta, Rome unconquered. In Constantinople, the Eastern Empire, which we now call Byzantium, carried the torch. Its emperors spoke Greek, wore silk, and debated theology instead of conquest, yet they still called themselves Romans. When they looked westward, across the darkening sea, they saw not death, but inheritance. So the empire did not die. It changed. Its body faded, but its spirit passed into the veins of Europe. In law, in architecture, in language, and in the Christian faith that grew from its bones, Rome lived on. Every kingdom that rose afterward measured itself against her shadow. Even those who toppled her dreamed of rebuilding her. As centuries turned, pilgrims still walked her broken roads. They knelt beside her fallen columns and traced the letters carved by hands, long turned to dust. The wind carried faint echoes of Latin prayers, of marching feet, of senators arguing beneath a vanished dome. And somewhere, deep within that echo, Rome still whispered as the last embers of empire cooled into the ashes of memory. I was once the world. Night settles. The fire burns low, the last embers tracing slow spirals into the dark. And though the story has ended, though the empire of marble and iron has turned to dust, something remains. Rome was never just a city. It was a way of imagining the world. To the men who built her roads and walls, Rome was order carved out of chaos. To the poets and philosophers, she was the mirror of human ambition, the proof that imagination could become stone and that courage could outlive death. And even in ruin, Rome endures. Her laws are written in the hearts of nations. Her words shape half the tongues of Europe. Her architecture, the arch, the dome, the column, still defines the shape of human pride. Every courthouse, every senate chamber, every city crowned with domes is a whisper of her memory. But the true legacy of Rome is not what she built. It is what she taught. That greatness is fragile. That power, however mighty, is never permanent. That civilization depends not on walls or armies, but on the quiet duty of ordinary people. Farmers who sow, soldiers who guard, scholars who remember, parents who teach. In the end, all empires fall. Yet each leaves behind seeds of language, of law, of art that grow again in new soil. Rome's seeds became Europe, Byzantium, the Church, the very idea of the West. And if you listen closely, in the hum of cities and the rhythm of roads, you can still hear her pulse. Somewhere tonight, in a classroom or a cathedral, in a soldier's oath or a scholar's vow, the name of Rome is still spoken. Not with fear, but with a strange tenderness, as though remembering an ancestor whose blood still runs in our own. History is not a line, but a circle. Every beginning is an echo of an ending. When Romulus built his walls on the Tiber's banks, he could not imagine this. The endless generations who would call themselves Roman in spirit long after the city's power was gone. And when the boy emperor Romulus Augustulus laid down his crown, he did not end the dream. He only turned the page. The centuries that followed would call themselves by other names: Frank, Norman, Byzantine, Italian, French, English. But beneath the banners and the languages, the old rhythm endured, the dream of unity, of law, of beauty lasting beyond life. Perhaps that is why Rome still fascinates us, not because she was perfect, but because she was human. She rose from violence, achieved wonder, and fell from her own weight. She was everything we are, only greater in scale and consequence. Her story is our story, told in stone instead of flesh. And so, as the fire dwindles and the night deepens, we can let the centuries drift past like leaves on a river. The wolves of legend, the legions on the march, the philosophers in their marble halls, they fade into shadow, but their light, faint and steady, remains. Rome was mortal, but what she believed in was not. She believed that the world could be made rational, that men could rise above fear, that order and beauty could exist together. She failed again and again, but she kept trying, and that, more than conquest or glory, is what made her eternal. When dawn comes, new empires will rise. Their banners will be different, their tongues unfamiliar, their gods forgotten by those yet unborn. And someday they too will crumble, and some distant voice will tell their story to an audience falling asleep beside another fire. But in that voice, in that memory, Rome will live again, not as marble or empire, but as the quiet, unending dream of civilization itself. Sleep now, traveler of ages. Let the echoes of the Tiber lull you. Let the ghosts of the Forum fade to whispers. For though the empire has fallen, the story continues, carried onward in every road, every book, every heart that still wonders what it means to build something that lasts. And perhaps, in that wondering, Rome has never truly fallen,